Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And Rob is joining me now via Zoom. So it's slightly different because we're actually far apart, but thanks to technology, we can continue these interviews. And now that I have proper internet, hopefully we can have these discussions regularly again. The people really like them and look forward to them and are relying on us to have our crazy, far out, totally relevant discussions. I suppose that's a good way of describing it. Rob, thanks so much for joining me all the way from Gauteng. And it was wonderful hearing the peacocks earlier, just hearing some wildlife in the background. Yeah, how are you doing?
Des, thank you. I'm thrilled to be back. It has been a long time. I'm sure it's several weeks since we, maybe even a couple of months since we did a video.
Almost 2 months, yeah.
Yes, and we didn't even speak on the phone until last night. That left me feeling, well, not uncomfortable, but cold shivers, in the sense that you and I both had at exactly the same time the need to phone each other. I had just sent myself a voicemail reminding myself to talk to you about something.
Yeah.
I still had the phone in my hand, and you phoned me, and you brought up a subject that was about the voicemail I sent myself. I was shocked. It was amazing. You've explained to me your understanding of how things work. To me, it was just a little it was more than a coincidence. It was weird, but I think you understand that phenomenon better than I do.
Yeah, I think that is something that we could probably discuss at some stage. I think a lot of people on that will be watching this do understand, and hopefully you will too in future. I always say when you see evidence for something, it becomes more real, and the more it happens, the more it becomes the truth. So yeah, I was literally standing in the kitchen, and we were busy having supper, and I had a prompting that I needed to call you. So I literally picked up the phone immediately, called you, and walked into the studio, and then we had our discussion. I had no idea why. I don't ask questions. I just do.
Yes, I was thrilled because I thought you actually forgot about me, because it's probably 3.5 weeks or 4 weeks since we even spoke to each other. So it was lovely to hear your voice again. And I was busy reminding myself about something that I wished to discuss whenever next we met or spoke. And so now it happens to be tonight. And I think the subject, coincidentally again, that I was thinking of was relationships. And it just so happens that you touched on that earlier today. And in these times when people are feeling more and more and more pressure, such as they were unaccustomed to in the history of humanity, my observations and research often lead me to hear or read stuff about the suicide rate in the entire world going up. And you touched on a story earlier that you explained a few minutes ago that it's beyond, who knows. So I'm going to talk a little bit about relationships tonight, and not from a scientific, psychological point of view, but from my own experiences in life and being able to reflect days, weeks, months, years later on what happened. And I had the good fortune of meeting, well, it was sort of good fortune and bad fortune, because I had to go and see somebody to help me process some events that occurred in my life that I think we touched on briefly in our very first video. You mentioned that things have happened to me that I didn't ask for in life and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, I ended up in the office of a guy I'm just going to call Erwin for the time being. And he helped me muddle through a few things. And one of nowadays, a lot of people are reaching out to each other, a friend or a husband, a son, child, father, mother, uncle, auntie, in confusion and desperation. And the very big mistake that people make when someone is unburdening themselves is to throw out a platitude or a cliche. That is the last freaking thing you want to hear. You don't want to hear, oh, it's always darkest before the dawn, or some stupid comment like that. The best thing if someone reaches out to you is saying nothing at all. And do not offer anybody that's suffering from depression advice. That is the last thing they want. And do not start a sentence with, you should. I once said to a friend of mine during this period of time that the next person that starts a sentence talking to me with the words, you should, I'm going to hit him so frigging hard that you should then go and see a doctor. That's the last thing you want. Don't say anything. If someone reaches out, all they want to hear is maybe you breathing on the other end of the phone. If there is anything that you can do, get in your car and drive to them. Don't ask them if you can come and see them. Drive there, walk into the house and hold his or her hand and say nothing. That is the best thing you can do. Don't throw out wise cracks and platitudes and nonsense like that. It makes matters worse, and it makes the people feel worse about themselves in the sense that they now equate themselves or measure themselves against your wisdom. And they always put themselves down. So don't, please, anybody out there, if someone reaches out, don't do those things I've just discussed. The other, I just want to go much deeper on, I don't want to go much deeper on that, but I want to touch on relationships with police. You can't look at a social media post anymore without just about everybody telling each other how bad the police are. That's the wrong attitude to approach. No matter what you think of the police and your experiences, they are your friends whether you like it or not. And if you have trouble in your life, guess who you're going to call? The very police that you berated the day before. Don't do it. Treat a policeman with respect. You don't have to be kind, just respect him, and they will treat you with respect back. I have observed an incident here that I had a couple of years ago on my property where I had to ask for help, and the people that were causing the issue had to be manhandled off the property. And I was so impressed with the patience and the respectfulness with which the police treated the two recalcitrant people, even though they were throwing out the most awful comments. They were very professional, and it compelled me to actually phone the commander and tell him that, and I took the names of the cops down, and I have them in my diary, and I said, please, you're doing something right, because this was an example of exactly how police should behave. There's another thing I want to touch on after having...
So they were actually a police service instead of a police force.
Yeah.
They were a service to you.
They were, and they were very professional, and I was mightily impressed. They were neatly dressed. It was just so sharp. It's not the first time that I've experienced good behavior by the police. Yeah, of course you do get, but that kind of attitude of disrespectfulness towards another human being is not confined to the police. It's everywhere. You get good ones, you get bad ones. But the police are your friends. Treat them with respect. But having said that, if you do find yourself in trouble, there's one thing I want to mention is that you do not have to speak. There is no law that says you have to speak to a policeman. If you feel uncomfortable or confused or threatened, and don't want to say anything because you might say the wrong, whatever the situation is, there's no law that says you have to answer any questions. When and if you get to court, it would be a good idea to answer the questions that the prosecutor puts to you, or your own defense attorney, whatever it is. But in an investigation, or you stopped it, or whatever, you do not. There's no law that says you have to speak to the police. And if you're feeling threatened or traumatized, the best advice I can give you: don't speak to them. Don't answer questions. Just say things like, "I'm so traumatized now. Do you mind if we leave this for later or another day or when we get to court? Or are you arresting me?" But be very mindful of the fact that anything you say, even if they've read you your rights, which is not really what happens on American television, although it's the same sort of legal concept, they sort of hand you a piece of paper and they read out your rights to you. I think they even ask you to sign it, if I remember correctly. So, please be mindful of the fact you don't have to speak to the police, but nevertheless treat them with the greatest of respect. It will pay off in the long run, whether you are innocently accused or whether you get whatever it is. Respectfulness and mindfulness will absolutely do your cause a lot of good. And do not make an enemy of a policeman. Do not ever do that.
Well, this all is part of relationships, and I mean, this is the topic for tonight, is actually building relationships with people. And you know, if you look at civility and you look at wanting to survive, protecting life, having those strategies and the advice you've just given now can save your life, can save your life in future when you least expect it. So it's very, very good advice, and it can save someone else's life. In the case where someone is really down already, you cannot imagine where that person's at. And that comments that you mentioned that you try and make to make things better is a comment that you should keep to yourself. And like you say, just touching someone's hand can make all the difference.
Des, you know,
or being there for them.
Very much so. It reminds me, in human relationships and humanity, people, human beings, there's a strong association with touching and relationships. Just a hand on the shoulder. You know, it's actually more powerful than a sentence. Just put your hand on somebody's shoulder, or pinch their nose, or take them by the hand. If it's a guy, don't be afraid you're going to be accused of being whatever. Just take him by the hand. Look at me now and tell him you love him. What's wrong with that? That would mean so much to somebody that's confused or troubled or tearful. And if he cries, cry with him. Or she cries, cry with him. If they laugh, laugh with them. That means so much to people that are finding themselves in emotional, physical trauma. I had some physical trauma experiences over the last 2 years, where on a few occasions I was rushed to casualty. And I was mightily impressed by the relationship that exists between professionals and their patients. The professionals I came across, it's actually going to leave this for another, much of other stuff that I want to discuss, I want to leave for another video.
Yeah.
But just the fact that you feel you're not alone, and the specialist or whoever's standing over you trying to put you together again, just the comfort that you can see in its eyes, the concern, you're halfway healed. You're halfway there. They don't actually have to do anything. The couple of few 5-6 times that a specialist or a doctor or someone came and took my hand when they saw I was falling to pieces, I thought, well, gee, there we go, I'm okay. I can feel him touch me and so on and so forth. Touch. I'm going to please remember anybody touch. Touch the one you love, touch the one you don't love. Take them by the elbow. It's so important. And I want to address the following comment to our government now. You've lost touch. You're being manipulated into treating your subjects cruelly. Stop it. There's no future in it for you or anybody else or humanity. Stop it. Treat your subjects, if you want to call them that, if you think of us as citizens, treat them as you would your family. Treat communities, cities, towns, in Parliament. Come on, guys, please. It's a joke. Treat us as human beings and make a decision about your citizens from a human perspective. If you bring that into the mix, into your day-to-day activities, your citizens, 50 or 60 million, however, you will be surprised how we respond. You will be surprised at the support you get. Show us some love because we need it. And the end result will be far better than the end result that we are heading for now, because trust me, we're on a bus. You guys are driving, you put your hands on the wheel, and the steering is connected to nothing. Let's just bring a little bit of humanity back, please. That's about as much as if anybody in government sees this, just bear it in mind. Just give us a thought, please. The other thing that I wanted to touch on briefly about the human condition is I've read a few papers, scientifically published papers, maybe not accepted by mainstream, but nonetheless by scientists, that interestingly say there's a genetic component to liberal-minded people and conservative-minded people. And there is an element of studying the genes of liberals, let's call them liberals. I'm not an expert on these things, but I've observed things. So there's a genetic component that is common to people who have a liberal outlook in life, and there's a genetic component to people that have a conservative outlook on life, and the two are distinguishable. When I read that paper, I was interested. And it brings me to the voice message I sent you last night on email. I don't know whether you opened it, but it was the message that I sent myself to remind myself on what I wanted to speak to you about. And another totally unrelated article I read was that, look, I think everybody on your channel, if I'm not mistaken, Des, help me here, really we're conservative minded, aren't we? In general, on your followers and
yes, people. I think people want to conserve life, conserve society, conserve civility, but yet believe in liberty. And I think this people get very confused over. In other words, freedom to choose.
I think there's a deliberate play on words and a deliberate confusion that seems to come out of America maybe more than Europe, in terms of how they've corrupted and harnessed the word liberal or liberty for their own ends, that is exactly the opposite of liberty.
Yeah.
So if people can maybe study words and English language better and understand what liberal and liberty means, you'll see that I'm referring now especially to, let's call it Democrats in America. You're the opposite of liberal. You have no clue. My question is, do they know it and they still carry on anyhow? Or are they completely oblivious to the fact that they're walking on the wrong path? What is your opinion?
I think a combination of a couple of things, Rob. And I think at this stage, to blur the lines was always what the people trying to create this new world order amongst us needed to do to get parents to a point where they don't care about their kids anymore, so that their children can be manipulated in the school and the varsity system. Because that's, at the end of the day, the end goal. And, I battle to get that point across because it's not sensational enough for parents. Now, if your kids are not enough of a concern to you, and Julius Malema or Jacob Zuma or whoever else is more sensational to you, there's something wrong with you. Okay, you should probably not be a parent, to be honest. And I know that's a very brutal statement to make, but if you don't care what your child's been taught at school outside of your hands, which might be completely and utterly against your beliefs, you're not worthy to be called a parent, and you should rethink how you do things. We removed our kids from school because we did question them on what was happening. We wanted to put them in a conservative school. We wanted to put them in a place where values still mattered, and that's where they were. That was not good enough. And the moment we realized something was wrong, we removed them because that's, what else was I supposed to do? Just say, well, I don't have an option. Let my child get taught this rubbish. So, yes, I think the blurring the lines was always necessary. I don't like to box people, but I mean, the concept of conservatism and liberalism, they aren't actually two opposites. This is where I really get annoyed, because to me, you don't have a liberal and a conservative. If you look at the true meaning of liberalism, most conservatives are classic liberals. So, someone like Big Daddy Liberty will say he's a classic liberal. There's many people like that. That people consider to be conservative. Like Willem Petzer. The first time I spoke to Willem Petzer, he's a well-known YouTuber, he said he's a classic liberal. I don't know if he still holds that position, but I understand that because a classic liberal can still be conservative. I live a conservative life. I try to conserve things. It's not a political statement. It's a way of being.
Correct.
And yet I believe in liberty. And there I probably fall into what people call the classic liberal which means both exist within me. And they don't clash at all. They actually work together in harmony. So you have to really mess people up. And this is why I try to stay out of all the isms and all the traps, the box traps. And there's actually something I want to discuss with you that I want to get your opinion on. But you can first carry on if you wanted to make any comment further before I get to that, because I would really like to hear your take on something that has really jumped out at me with regards to people willing to give their lives for freedom. And the fact that now people are expecting people to give up their freedom to protect life.
Okay, that's a big question. Can I quickly go back 2 minutes?
Yes, please.
During one or two of the last or the previous to last, video we did, we touched briefly on, I touched briefly on the Jewish thing, and
Yeah.
you threw something at me that I deliberately avoided answering, and that's about Big Daddy Liberty. If you're watching
Yeah.
Big Daddy Liberty, if you want to know about Zionism, phone me. And if after I've explained my view on it, you still believe in Zionism, okay, well, then you're free to go. But I wish that you could just educate yourself a little bit more about the broader aspect of Zionism, and I can give you my opinion on it. So, all right, so we dealt with that. I
There's
finally
a
answered
history,
your
Rob.
question.
There's a history that you cannot do away with that I think many people are just not aware of. And once I've laid out that history in my 00 Days meetings, I was very straightforward about it. And, you know, those videos of mine on YouTube hasn't been removed because it's just history. You can't get rid of it or throw it away. Most people choose to, you know, just look the other way. But the fact that the Rothschild family created Israel is a fact. The fact that they created the whole concept of this fight for an Israeli state in the US by creating this huge organization. It's a fact. So the whole Zionist movement was created by them. They funded it, they orchestrated it. It was, and the history is there. It's plain and simple for anyone to see. And, you know, I think a lot of people don't understand what they mean by Zionism, because if they understand my understanding, which is based on history, not on emotions or religious beliefs, then they get a different take. And a lot of people appreciate the fact that they have a different take. And I know you're an expert on the subject. So maybe we should do a video just on that.
Yeah, yes, you can't argue with evidence. You know, the funny thing is that you can't have a discussion with anybody who does not accept evidence. You're wasting your own breath and you're wasting their time. Just forget about it and move on.
Yeah. Yes.
Don't accept evidence. It's not worth a discussion.
Yeah.
Very
good advice.
It's bringing me to something that I think I mentioned to you on our telephone conversation last night, where for some strange reason, I don't know what button I pushed on my laptop, on my keyboard, here it is, my keyboard, on my lap. The name Jan Bankis, or Jan Bunches, came up as if I had asked a question of Google. And the weird thing is, it said Jan Bunches, or Jan Bankis, as my folks used to call him, who was the Secretary General of the Voortrekkers, just in case somebody doesn't know. It said Jan Bankis Avenue 322. Now, I know there's a Jan Bankis or Bunches Avenue in Pretoria, but there's no number 322. Now, for those who think I'm a conspiracy theorist and all that nonsense out there, if you look no further than the Skull and Bones Club at Yale University, underneath the emblem is the numbers 322. That has significance to Masonism. After I left that window and did stuff, I came back and I could find nothing about Jan Bunches other than the fact that he was a Freemason. And it then dawned on me for the first time in my life that the entire Voortrekker movement was created by Freemasons. And that shook me rigid, to realize that they planned so far ahead, 100 years or more, 200, whatever, 300 years, They have a vision. And I've always tried to figure out, how do these folk that plan these events, for maybe they think it's the best thing, how do they achieve continuity? And you've tried to explain it to me, and I'm still at a loss, because it's from generation to generation, the same plan gets rolled out.
Okay, well, this is where I'm going to throw a spanner in the works, Rob, because you will find Masons that actually wanted to get away from the Bavarian Illuminati ways that were brought here by the British, and actually wanted to be free. And in order to subvert that, you would need to get Masons to infiltrate that movement. You would have to create other sub-movements, including the secret societies that Cecil John Rhodes started.
Yes.
As well as the Broederbond, as well as the Ossawa Brandwacht, to then get control and try and use the Masonic fraternity to your own end. Because remember, they believe in liberty. And this is where it becomes very complex, and that history is fascinating. So if you look at the different lines of Freemasonry that exist in South Africa, the Boer Masons were very different to the British Masons and many of the others. So you can have Welsh Rite, you can have Scottish Rite, you can have all sorts of different rites within the country that have different lodges. And if you actually see who of the movement that actually created the entire concept of Afrikanerdom, or the Boers or Afrikaans, and especially the nationalist movement that happened at the same time as what happened in Germany and the rise of Hitler, then you will see various people playing various roles, some of them knowingly, some of them unknowingly. And that is where it gets fascinating, because it's not that straightforward. It's not like you can say, but the Masons created the Voortrekkers. It's not that simple. That's not true. There's many Masons that wanted to be free and literally were at the charge of leading people into the middle of nowhere to actually find freedom, to not be oppressed. And then you will find those that might have been in cahoots with the British in bringing this Bavarian Illuminati idea to the country, where we're going to improve everything. We're going to build roads and bridges and all the wonderful things, and then give the people consumerism and get even the most inept person to now own something that they could never create themselves. And I'm sure Rothschild saw that as huge progress, and most people will believe that it is.
You and I have touched on this Freemason thing on a couple of occasions, and thank you for clearing that up with me. I don't have that depth of knowledge about them, so I accept what you say. We do seem to differ slightly, in terms of the influence that Freemasons have on society today. I understand that you say that it's not as hectic and big as what it's made.
They don't control the world, Rob. That's not at all. I mean, to me, that is a fact. They are not that powerful or influential at all. I'm convinced of that. But I mean, you can have a different opinion. I mean, I can be proven wrong based on all my research and understanding of who actually runs what. And, you know, if that movement had to be used today to implement a new world order, they wouldn't be in the state that they're in right now.
One thing that I have uncovered about Freemasonry is, back in the day, let's call it 1950s, 1960s, their movement or their membership was far, far bigger than what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely.
It diminished and diminished and diminished and diminished, to the extent that some years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I think it was 40, no, 20, I was 42 when I was invited, if they could invite me to join the Masons, and they really asked that in the battle. But I then realized that they're struggling for membership. And a
Yeah.
week or so ago, I had a look at how many, what Google says, how many I think it's 160,000. And that's not a lot of people. So, yeah, I hear what you say. And they certainly have shrunk in number hugely over the last 60 years or whatever the case may be.
So to me, that means that they could only be used up to a point, and they are no longer that relevant. Otherwise, their relevance would have been bolstered.
Yes. Well, I like what you say in the sense that it appeals to my emotional side. Um, it makes me feel more comfortable and less anxious about some secret society that manipulates things and so on and so forth. It certainly makes me feel less anxious. And of course, coming from you, it means
Well, I
so
don't know
much.
how they are secret, Rob, when their buildings are openly seen everywhere. And they say outside on the lodge what it is. I don't know how that is secretive at all, in fact. It's not a secret society. A lot of people might see it as that, but I think they consider what they do as sacred. And if you speak to a Mason and you ask them that, that's probably the answer they will give you. Some of them might feel differently. I suppose it'll be different for every person you ask. But I once again look at the evidence. There's nothing secret about them. Their buildings are open there for everyone to see. They put it in public spaces. They don't dig a dungeon underground. And they proudly display their symbols, the square and compass, and then put their name up there, Masonic Lodge for wherever.
I do. I do recall researching something about Weishaupt after you mentioned him some year or two ago, and it seems as though he also, like you say, he used Freemasonry to accomplish some ends that were perhaps foreign to Freemasonry already.
Yeah.
So that seems the connection to me with Weishaupt and Freemasonry.
Well, it's not just, that's a big connection, because when the Bavarian Illuminati was banned, because many of the members were drafted out of the Masonic fraternity, and the Masonic fraternity could still function outside of Bavaria, many of them went back to lodges. But now with a different ideology in mind, the ideology of the greater good.
Yes.
And there you have a stuff up of note.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, Des. It does mean a lot to me. It takes some anxiety away, I must admit. As regards further relationships, I think I've kind of done my bit. I can't think of anything more to say that's relevant at the moment, other than relationships at every level are now under pressure, and it's incumbent on each person to take a little more responsibility for respectfulness to any and everyone you come into contact with.
I actually
more necessary than ever before.
Absolutely, and let me tell you something. I think at this stage, if the Masons, because I understand their right, it's not a secret to me. If they stick to their right, then they should be joining us in the fight for freedom. So they should be doing whatever they are doing in their lodges and in their personal lives to improve our chances for freedom. They should be joining us in the fight. And, you know, any organization that exists out there, I will welcome any person or people that will join us in the fight for liberty, because if that doesn't exist, even their existence or their freedom to function within their religion, within their culture, or their organization will cease to exist in that future order that will be created. There will be no more place for any organization like the Masons, or for Christians, or for Muslims, or for Jewish people, or Hindus, or Buddhists, or whatever. It has to be done away with to create that new system, and you can see it at work in the world right now. So it's very important that what I was taught as a young child to fear certain people. When I learned the facts, I look at the facts. I don't try and create something that serves my interest or fears or whatever. You have to put that aside and just look at facts. And it's the easiest way to get facts is to speak to someone. Like you say, if someone needs another human, it's best to just go to them and be with them. But if you want facts, speak to a person and they will tell you what they will. It's better than sitting and looking at some nutcases YouTube compilation out of other people's videos, and then it's being put out as fact because it's sensational. I've seen that on my own channel. The 10 questions that I just put out recently in a series, some of them are being watched more than others. Why? Because the heading is more sensational. Not because I tried to make it sensational, because it's been topical in the last bit, when every single one of those questions are important. And if you actually want to see what I'm going to be doing from next week, all of them should be relevant. And yeah, if you see how many people have watched those, some of them have had over 1,000 views, but that's very few considering there's over 34,000 subscribers on this channel. So if you look at the people that are actually interested in their future or in their children or in the relationships, as you say, at this stage, we need to grow those numbers. I don't want to be negative and say it's very few people. What I want to say is that we need to grow the numbers that care about other fellow humans, that feel their humanity again. And this is something I'm trying to do, is for people to get in touch with their own humanity. And when I made the video this morning, I said that I reflected myself on what I can do to keep myself sane. And relationships is an excellent way of maintaining sanity. You know, having an interview with you is a form for me to maintain sanity. It's uplifting. It's something I can learn from, and yeah, it's awesome just hearing wisdom.
Thank you. If it means something to you, you can understand with my lifestyle how much it means to me to be able to have a discourse with you. It's a big thing in my life. Thank you. I just briefly want to go back to a little bit of psychology before I try and answer the question about freedom that you asked 10 minutes ago. Is that I read another psychological article published by scientists who say that human evolution, the evolutionary psychology has, or understands or believes or discovered that the psychology of humanity develops into the most comfortable way, whether it's true or not. So humanity evolves psychologically to choose the easy path, the more comfortable path, whether it's real or not. And that brings me to my observation that somebody like you has got to put out so much information of a truthful kind that is uncomfortable to practically everybody, to overcome that human psychological evolutionary gene we have in us. It's a big thing. Having said that, you're doing a damn good job. I read a scientific article recently about the evolutionary psychology of humanity that evolves into the most comfortable mindset as a construct, and not necessarily the truthful mindset, because truth is uncomfortable for humanity, even at a genetic level. And that genetic human evolutionary or psychological evolutionary component is something that is a big thing that folk like you and me and everybody else must overcome. And that is why we've got to put out so much information so regularly, repetitively, to overcome that psychological evolution that is standing absolutely in our way. Can you relate to that?
I can't just relate. We see the evidence for that. So sheep mentality is exactly that. That is what we default to. All of us. I mean, all of us have been there at some stage of our life to some degree. Now that we're at war to literally maintain some semblance of freedom, some of the sheep jumped into action and want to now break out of that fence. And all of us are guilty of this, Rob, including myself.
Yes. Yeah, it's a genetic thing we've got to overcome. That's what I've come to conclude.
That's a very big point to make and something for people to reflect on.
Yes, very much
and admit, you know, that it's always easy to go to the comfortable.
Yeah, it's a genetic thing.
It's a pathetic thing. You know, that's where the word pathetic really comes in strongly. And, you know, I've had to many times in my life realize that I'm pathetic to get myself to the point where I would act. And I know I'm very harsh on myself. I'm a Virgo. I like things to be right. And when things aren't going right, and I'm deeply touched by other people's hurt since I was a young boy. And that drives me heavily. So when other people experience hurt or pain, it deeply affects me. I really internalize that. And I'm fortunate that I can cope with it. But that gets me to go over into action. Yeah, and we're at that stage now where whatever I can do, I feel will never be enough. That's why we need so many people involved in doing something and overcoming exactly what you've mentioned now, that default back to sheepishness.
Correct. Absolutely. That brings me to now, if I understood your question correctly, about giving your life for freedom.
Well, it's not a question. It's I suppose it's more. The question is the fact that is a fact because we have history. So to just explain properly, during the First War, the Second World War, many wars before then, millions, hundreds of millions of people were willing to give their lives, literally, to maintain freedom. Okay? And in all the wars throughout history, most of those were over freedom. And now, in this new order that's been created, it's been turned around where people are willing to give up their freedom for their life.
I got you. That's about as deep a question as you can ask anybody.
And you know, this is the fight we're in right now, is how did that shift happen? And it happened like this, because between the Second World War now, a lot must have been achieved to shift that mentality. However, I believe it's just a mainstream media ploy. In other words, they are creating that narrative. I don't believe the majority of people are there at all. If the majority of people can know what we know now immediately, if we can do that information transplant, we will have the majority of people in the world going to war again. That's what I believe.
Yes. Just to expand a little on my thoughts on that, where the New World Order ideology is to give up your freedom for life, the response should not be to give up your life for freedom. We need to stay alive in order to fight this. Giving up our lives is counterproductive. We've got to fight it without giving up our lives. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And, you know, this is why I tell people ending up in jail and trying to be a superhero in the realm we're operating in now. We're not at the Second World War. We're not at the First World War.
Correct.
So it's a completely different war that we have to fight. So it's an information war, isn't it, Rob? And because of the amount of information that's been pumped into kids since they went to school, from when I was in school in the 70s, I think in the 70s it started, you know, when televisions became a tool in people's homes.
Correct.
Then heavy indoctrination could start. Before then, it was more difficult. You needed to use libraries, you needed to use varsities, and it started in the 60s already. A lot of the plans of the Bavarian Illuminati started being implemented in learning institutions, and mainstream thought for that had to start at a much higher level and then work its way down to where most of the world's population are influenced by it. So you either had to put a political system in place that oppresses the citizens of a country, or you had to put what you call a democracy in place where you can brainwash most of society. You end up with the same end result.
Couldn't agree more with you. There's absolutely correct. We are in an information war, absolutely. But I observe, not only you, but lots of people with our mindset of becoming known. In the last few years, it's accelerated exponentially. And it really warms the cockles of my heart to see lots and thousands, millions of people marching to the beat of the same drum. And you know that I've often wrestled with the veracity of Donald Trump, because he seemed to have woken up in me a spirit. And what proves to me that he was never really, I don't want to call him, he was never a catalyst for change. Never, ever, ever, ever. Because at some stage in his life, he must have had well over 1 billion loyal supporters, if not 2 billion, that would worshipped at his feet. And if he did see himself as a catalyst for change, he would have taken advantage of that unique opportunity, which is now gone. That proved to me, finally, that he was always a distraction.
And divisionist, you know, and the fact that Biden followed up on Trump, I always say, look at the evidence, proves that Trump was never a president for the other half of the country. Biden is never going to be a president for the Trump half of the country. So it's just perfect division. So you're sitting with a country that is split down the middle. I can't think of a worse scenario. We're not in that scenario in South Africa. And that makes us unique. And people that don't understand my statements when I say that South Africa is the freest country in the world, and there's some idiot from the Democratic Alliance that made comments about the things that I say, the fact that I said that, and he's actually running to be a mayoral candidate up there in Gauteng, typical DA. And so he has to protect his livelihood or his chances of earning a fat salary. And he cannot comprehend how I can say that we are the safest and the freest country in the world, because he doesn't understand the starting point. He cannot even comprehend where freedom begins and ends, because he doesn't care about it at all. So like you said earlier, you cannot even have a discussion with someone like that. There's no starting point for a discussion. And I'm afraid when it comes to my series of videos now on political organizations, it's going to be difficult to start with many of them. I'm not even going to get past the first premise of greater good ideology versus individual liberty. We're going to get stuck there and not even getting to the questions. Yeah, but I think it's going to be revealing. So I'm looking forward to it.
I want to take this opportunity just to be a little bit personal with a neighbor of mine. Gary, I'm going to phone you like we agreed this morning, and I'm going to have a chat with you. And thank you for talking to me. We'll see you during the week. And before I forget, Des, happy birthday for tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Rob. I've forgotten again until you mentioned it.
Yeah,
There's too much happening in my life from one moment to the next. There's so much to think of continuously. I do have to make time for myself. You know, I thought earlier I want to take my boys quickly to go and do some bass fishing before the sun sets. I didn't get time for that. I actually passed out on my bed for like half an hour before I phoned you. I was just that drained. Yeah, but at least I had a bit of sleep. I just woke up and I realized, oh shucks, I was gone.
So, yeah, I can easily hear. I can easily hear in your voice when you taking strain. It's like so obvious to me. I wonder if other people also perceive that. But on occasion when we have spoken on the phone, shame, I immediately hear, oh gee gosh, I wish I was there to hug the guy or whatever the case, because he seems like he needs a hug right now.
It is tough. Luckily, when I feel that way, I go and hug my entire family. I make a point of doing that. I line up the girls and I line up the boys, and then I go to my wife and just spend time with them, because then you remind yourself of why you're doing what you're doing. And that keeps me going again. And, you know, I'm energized doing this interview because we're doing something that keeps me sane. It's awesome having a discussion like this with you. And I think this format has worked out quite nicely, because both of us can be seen on the screen. It'll be easy to edit. And we can have many like this now that I have proper internet. So, yeah, it's been awesome.
Yes, and since I've now learned earlier from you how to switch my camera on, that also make a difference.
Yeah. But it was great talking to you. Is there anything else that you want to say to the people on the channel before we close off?
To take the conversation to another ballpark completely, and give everybody something to think about. It's something that I and Des have been researching for many years, and we've both come to the same conclusion. And I mentioned it in our last video about the Pentagon's release of information regarding the UFO phenomenon in June.
Yeah.
Whether you guys like it or not, whether you believe it or not, the phenomenon is real. And if you understood, you folks out there don't want to think of me as insane. If you think there is more to it than any one single human being can comprehend, it's that real. So do some research and have some fun, and don't get too hung up in it, because we're part of it.
Yeah, we're part of it. I like that. You can't get away from it. That's what popped into my mind. You know, it's not something you can wish away. It's very real. And I like the fact that we call it what it is, a phenomenon. So, which means we need to try and explain and understand it properly. And that's where it stays. You know, a lot of people like to add on tails where there is nothing to add. And at this stage, it's fascinating that that is the case. Don't you think? I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. It's a wonderful universe that we live in. It's a very special place. The fact that we're alive and we can do what we're doing is incredible. I think this earth is the most hostile place where humans can ever be. I don't think there's anything worse in store for us. This is the pits, and it can only get better from here.
That brings such a sense of relief to me, because life is hard for everybody. Nobody can say that, oh, I had a charmed life.
This is not a picnic. It's not a picnic, Rob.
It's tough, and especially when you have children. It seems to be a combination of the most beautiful, joyous thing a human being can experience, and the most terrorizing thing that a human can experience.
literally terrorizing. But it was, yes, people need to deal with it. A lot of people are asking me questions about that in the live streams, in the WDS live streams with members. And I will probably do a live stream tomorrow at some stage within all the subscribers on the channel. I look forward to that. I want to do that on my 50th birthday. So it'll probably be tomorrow evening around 9 o'clock. And yeah, I just thought of that now. I don't plan things. It just seems like the right thing to do, and spend like half an hour with the subscribers on the channel and just share my thoughts, especially looking back on my life. I mean, you've lived a much longer life. There's so much that you still need to share with us. So people look forward to the next interview with Rob in the Age of Wisdom. The series is called. And I really want to thank you, Rob, for coming on with me. And I'm looking forward to the next one. And I think we should do this weekly. Instead of 2 weekly, do it weekly, just to catch up. It's like we have 2 months to make up for. So there's at least 4 videos we need to pump out there fairly quickly. I don't want people to miss out on the information. So if you will be happy with that, then we can try and do that as soon as possible.
This Via Donkey, I look forward to that, and thank you for giving me this opportunity again. I love you and your family, and all your followers. God bless you all. Until next time.
Thank you so much, Rob. We all love you. The dogs, there's no cat there anymore. The peacocks and the sheep and the lamb, I'm sure, is big by now. But we'll be seeing you probably much sooner than you think. It might just be me coming up. But I'm really looking forward to that. But we'll make those announcements soon in the near future for that Freedom SA event where we can just be a bunch of people together. And sing Kumbaya around a campfire. We don't have to do that. We can sing something else. But it's so important. And that's building relationships. And just ending off the theme of this interview, as you said, people need to relate to each other. That's what relationships are. And it's a basic part of humanity that's being broken down right now. This is why we need to gather together. There should be gatherings of people. Thank you, Rob. Have a good evening. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.